Yeah, as Ursula said, my work for the last 15 years has been around community resilience, and with a real focus on local economic resilience. How do we strengthen our local economies to cope with the disruptions and shocks that we are locked into? I think before we look at defining resilience, we need to look at what do we need to be resilient to? And I think in the context of coastal communities and rural communities, I think we're all aware now of the ecological and climate emergency we're in. We're seeing depopulation of our rural areas, a loss of jobs and livelihoods. And it's in this context that we really need to build our ability to cope, our ability to thrive. And I also think that it's just before we dive into looking at resilience that we're also at a time where the new funding and supports from Europe will all have a focus on sustainability, circular economy, and ensuring that our local communities can thrive. So I think in that context, let's look at resilience. So over the years, we have understood resilience from a personal point of view, our ability to cope with adversity, our ability to bounce back from trauma or tragedy or bad news. And personal resilience is sometimes called our bounce back ability, our ability to bounce back. A number of years ago, I was involved in some research with Carnegie Foundation, and we looked at community resilience and really saw that as the existence and development and engagement of community resources to really be able to thrive in an environment that more and more will be categorized by change, uncertainty, unpredictability. And we need to be ready to cope with that from a community point of view. So from a community resilience, really it's a capacity to be able to overcome adversity and to adapt to change positively. When we start to look at this idea of resilience from an economic point of view, it can be seen as our ability locally in our local economy to adapt to these short-term shocks and disruptions and long-term change while supporting the community to be able to thrive. It's about making our community stronger and really in terms of diversified income and being able to support local jobs and livelihoods. So some features from Greenham and Ryan Collins' research, some features of a resilient economy would be looking at, as we're going to see in some of the examples following this talk, of producing goods and services locally, an appropriate scale, really to strengthen the local and regional economy. And we're going to see economic resilience needed to adapt to climate change and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels as quickly as we can to reduce the ecological impacts and be able to transform our infrastructure, our energy, our transport systems, and that can avail of more renewable resources and a more effective use of the resources and assets around us. Economic resilience means investing in the social as well as the financial capital of our local areas. And really we need a just transition where we address poverty and inequalities and make sure that the most marginal voices are heard and that everyone can access the resources and engage in our communities. So really it's about supporting our individuals and groups to develop and strengthen their ability to cope, their adaptive capacity. It really will need some education and training around how do we self-organize at the local level, how do we ensure that the structures and institutions around us support people to live locally and to bring jobs, livelihoods into that local area to increase our well-being. So some trends that we see, and this is what we've been doing with Ecolease through the Communities for Future program, is really trying to illuminate a lot of the community-led local development, the community-led initiatives that are building economic resilience. So we're starting to see examples of community orchards and community gardens. And community gardens not only are a fantastic environment in our local areas to maybe learn to grow food, but they actually grow community. So it builds social capital, a lot of these initiatives. Some big examples we see now are community supported agriculture. I'm involved here in Cloughjordan in a large community farm where people subscribe up front for their vegetables. And through that subscription, we can pay to farmers and all the inputs on the farm. So creating a direct connection and relationship between farmers and consumers. And we're starting to see this now in community supported fisheries, creating a direct connection between the fishermen and the consumers. These are fish to fork or farm to fork initiatives, and there's a lot that they share. One of the priorities we're going to see in these new supports from Europe and funding streams is a focus on digitalization. And I think there's a lot to be concerned around digitalization, but there is a lot that we could really avail of and benefit from. And one of the digital platforms I really like, because it's user owned, it's owned by the community, it's not proprietary, it's an open source platform that enables, I think, a stronger local economy. It sort of can shorten supply chains and create a route to market for food producers, farmers, potentially fishermen, craftspeople in their local communities, and allow citizens to able to access directly from the producers food or local services. So the Open Food Network is something that I'm quite excited about from the sense of building stronger local economies. In energy, we see a lot of trends around energy efficiency, community energy co-ops. This is the rooftop revolution, where when we can actually put solar panels on our community buildings and our church roofs, we could actually increase our energy security, but also an income to our economies locally. So we're seeing a lot of community energy co-ops emerging. We're also seeing community transport initiatives. So community-led transport. In Ireland, we have the Local Link, which is a community-driven door-to-door bus service for people in rural areas who might not be able to access strong public transport. We're seeing the emergence of car clubs, where people are seeing the asset of the car as a burden, and that is access to mobility when needed is what's essential. So car clubs, instead of owning the car, you belong to a car. We're seeing these in the cities across Europe, but now we're starting to see them emerge in rural areas. And even in my community, we have some informal car clubs where maybe 12 families are sharing a few cars together. We're also seeing carpooling, bicycle sharing, and tool libraries. These are all examples of a sharing economy where we can access assets and resources when needed and take the burden of ownership off our own shoulders. So we can start to see these trends, and I think they fit very well the priorities of the Green New Deal, Smart Villages, the New Leader Programme. You could see these in a circular economy where we start to see wealth circulating in our local economies. And one of the most exciting new approaches I've witnessed is this idea of community wealth building. Now, this emerged in cities like Cleveland or Preston that were industrial centres of the Industrial Revolution and have been decimated, and are now seeing that through this programme of community wealth building, and it's changing the procurement of the big institutions in their cities that were spending money outside of the city and region to keep that money circulating to smaller companies, co-ops, farmers that could provide the needs of these big institutions. So I see this as a circular economy approach that's people-centered, that's all about local economic development. And we're starting here in Ireland to see this not just in cities, but in territories and regions where maybe the hospital or the local authority office or the big institutions, their spend is redirected into the local economy. I think these trends really show that there's an opportunity for rural communities and coastal communities that might, in the last few decades, really struggled with population loss, with young people moving away and not returning, with jobs and livelihoods missing. We can start through community-led local development or community-led initiatives to rebuild our local economy and to keep wealth locally, to create new job and livelihood opportunities in our local areas and really make them thrive. So to make this transition, what do we really need? Well, I think we need to shift away from a current debt-based economic model. Business as usual is not an option, and yet the lack of imagination in actually what we might do. So there's a lot of work on prosperity without growth, or the well-being economy, which really allows us to live within the carrying capacity of this planet, but create a social foundation that allows the well-being for all. The transition needs to be a just transition, as I said, the engagement of those most impacted. We have to leave no one behind, and we need to ensure that every voice is heard and that we can engage with everyone in our local areas. Social innovation in rural regions is essential, and real transformative social innovation, where we look at things like community wealth building or local jobs and initiatives that aren't just providing jobs, but also making our local places more attractive, or sharing the resources and assets more widely. And I think really that we need education and training for communities, highlighting what actions and supports are coming down the line. And I think initiatives like this, and FARNet and FLAGS and the LAGs and the European Rural Parliament, and these sort of initiatives are really helping us see how we frame our work in the local regions with community-led local development, with these new community-led initiatives that could really help us to localize our food, our energy, our transport, allow us to restore ecosystems and regenerate communities and be able to thrive with these bottom-up opportunities. So really my objective was really just to share some insights into how we might understand resilience, and when we rather than seeing it as a bounce back ability for economic resilience and for community resilience, we really need to see it as a breakthrough, not a bounce back, a breakthrough in a new way of providing jobs and livelihoods and making our communities flourish.